How do? Welcome back to my channel, World War II Books, Where to Start. I'm your host, Captain Donald McIntyre, reporting live somewhere in the North Atlantic, hunting U-boats. Come on in and grab a seat. We got to talk about some biographies, some serious stuff here. We're going to talk about the big bad man himself, Mr. Adolf Hitler. If you want to around in World War II long enough, you're going to come up against the myth, the legend, and the truth of this guy. He is the prime mover of the whole thing, shall we say. And if you delve around long enough, have a sustained enough interest in it, eventually you may want to read a bio of Hitler. He's still a hot topic to this day, very, extremely controversial. And he comes up in political terms even to this day in the first quarter of the 21st century. How you feel about him, how you talk about him, and how you react to his name can be hot political topics even in this day and age. It's kind of bizarre to think that someone who exited the stage in 1945 is still affecting our thought patterns and our speech patterns today, and how we shape and mold conversations. And the mythology of Hitler is just as big a problem as the reality of Hitler. So if you want to get down to brass tacks and really discover what was behind the mythology, I've got 3 bios I recommend you check out. Anything by Bill O'Reilly, don't touch with a 10-foot pole. He's not a historian. He was a talking head on Fox News. Don't fall for that trap. It's garbage. We're going to do the real stuff. And we're going to start off with A Study in Tyranny. Hitler, A Study in Tyranny by Alan Bullock, dating all the way back to 1962, clocking in at a eye-watering 808 pages, single volume bio. Bullock was the first guy to touch it and attempt a full-scale bio of Hitler after the war. He's British, and he's definitely an old-school British historian. The first couple chapters may throw you off the rails right away because it's going to cover some deep background of the German mentality, shall we say, and Hitler's family lineage, which he presents in a very confusing manner. It doesn't read cleanly at all. Even if you had like a genealogy table in front of you, all the begats of Hitler's family tree, and who was what and what was who, and how they relate to Hitler's psychology later on, it can be quite a muddle. If you survive that opening mud patch there, you'll be all right. Now, I'm not going to pretend that stuff in Hitler's early life written by Bullock can be all that entertaining. It's a slow build. It's a slow burning fuse. The stuff in his childhood, and after his father's death, his enlistment in the German army, up to the time he becomes a political guy, it doesn't really catch the imagination until the 30s. But then again, you run into another quagmire of the political cycle and the attempts by the Nazi Party to get into power through legal elections. And that can be a struggle of reading too. As I said about another topic, election results are never going to thrill me for reading material. They're just not. And it's kind of tough to get through. But the value of Bullock is that he presents Hitler's court, his coterie of weirdos and psychopaths and sociopaths, and he gathers around him to run the German state in this medieval kind of setting, but transported to the 20th century and modern nation state. This cast of generally incompetent, crazy people, and we would just determine they're absolutely mad, to run a modern nation state and then to attempt the conquest of Europe. Relying on these people and the relationships of power as they all gather more offices and more authority around themselves, kind of like a wonky solar system, if you will, of planets orbiting around Hitler as the sun, and who affects who most and who's got the most tug at any one time amongst his coterie of sycophants is really the heart of the book, and really good. Does he get everything quite right? No, this was the embryonic Hitler bio. So some of his perceptions of the Nazi state are very outdated. The research just wasn't there. He was just kind of fishing around in the dark, being the first guy to stick his finger in the mess and see what he came up with. So some of the stuff's kind of outdated for the mechanics of Nazi ideology, the mechanics of the Nazi state, it just doesn't, it's not quite valid today. But it can be a valuable starting point if you want a long single volume to get a complete picture of Hitler. Yeah, it's good. It's going to be a slow read, and nothing fast about this. Still in print. There's an abridged version if you want the diet size instead of the full length. So it's good. I think it's aged a little bit poorly, is what I'm trying to get at. It's just not quite up to date in scholarship. But that's Ian Bullock's study in Tyranny. And then moving on to the 70s, John Toland's 2-volume study is just called Adolf Hitler by John Toland. 2 volumes, Volume 1, Volume 2, no subtitles. Published in 76. First volume runs at 525 pages, main body text, and second volume is probably a little bit longer. When we get to the 2 volumes, they're going to do the typical division, birth up to the start of the war, or around about the start of the war, and then everything from 38, 39 on to 45. This typical chopping point is a good division of his life. And Toland's going to make Hitler more human, which can be very problematical for some readers. A lot of people envision him as the boogeyman of the 20th century, the ultimate horror story, right? Again, the mythology of the man gets in the way of the reality of the man. And Toland kind of takes the viewpoint of a traditional biographer. We're trying to talk about a human life. No matter how horrific he became, he was originally, of human stock and in the same species as us. He's not a demon. He's not a ghost. He's not a separate entity apart from the stream of humanity. He takes that viewpoint. And what he does better than Bullock is to do his childhood and his experiences in the Great War as a soldier for the German army and the imperial system, as well as the stuff in the 30s. While he's on the campaign trail constantly driving and flying across Germany, just kind of the interactions with his lackeys as they wander around Germany, campaigning here, campaigning there, speech, just kind of giving you the day-to-day grist of what Hitler's normal experience was. And I find that kind of valuable. Does he humanize him too much? I don't think so. Once you get into the war, then all the dark side comes out, if you will, and you get it. Yeah, he's a bad man. He's a really, really bad man. I think again he kind of revolves around the circle of Hitler's advisors and office holders and cabinet ministers. He kind of runs them in and out of the scene to show you the interactions between the power source and the wannabe power sources. And again, it's a different era. So we got the 60s and 70s, different viewpoint, different mentality of the writing, better level of scholarship available in the 70s with more documents being available. So it's more complete from that perspective. And he's American, so the writing is cleaner, shall we say. It's not as roundabout as Bullock. Bullock was very scholarly and roundabout, and had a lot of long sentences. Bullock's going to chop it down to more essential journalistic style, because I believe he started out as a journalist before he became full-scale historian. So I find it still good to this day. And as I said, if you want the diet, there's an abridged diet version of his also, single volume instead of 2, if you don't want the whole mess, the whole kit and caboodle. Good stuff. I'd rate it a 3 or 3.5 star, maybe 4 star. But then you get to Ian Kershaw, his 2-volume monster, published in 98. Volume 1 called Hubris, and Volume 2 subtitled Nemesis. Volume 1 runs to 590 pages, main body text, and Volume 2, again, is going to be a little bit longer. He does the typical chop, beginning of his life to 39, and then Volume 2 is going to be start of the war to the end of the war. And Kershaw's is the most analytical and most tightly focused. He spends an extensive amount of time on his childhood and formative psychological experiences. He tries to psychoanalyze them to a large degree, especially early on. He wants to find the origins of his anti-Semitic rhetoric and where he really became the raving lunatic about anti-Semitism that he was. He's very data oriented. He's kind of like a sports statistician in this sense. He's chopping Hitler's life into data segments and trying to analyze it more like a scientist than just a regular historian or a straight-up biographer. So it's very precise in many points. He's going to exhaust a lot of topics in some great detail. And this may be a little bit too much detail for some readers. But I found it to be the best of the lot in the modern sense. He's got extensive documents that were not available to the earlier biographers. The literature on the Third Reich has really exploded exponentially over the decades as more and more stuff is uncovered. And of course you got some access to Russian stuff now too that wasn't available during the Cold War. So Kershaw's got a lot to draw on, and his bibliography and notes kind of shows it. The bloat here is incredible. There's probably 200, 300 pages of notes and bibliography in each volume. And the indexing is just massive. It must have been a really tough project to complete. So as far as detail, man, it's there. And the heart of the matter here for Kershaw is the decision for the annihilation of the Jews. He's going to detail that exhaustively as to when the actual decision was made to proceed with the full-scale Holocaust as we know it today. And this also relates to the focus of the book. It is extremely myopic, extremely Hitler-centric. We're just boil it down to the kernel, that one atom, Hitler himself. Everybody else bouncing around him in a quantum state, higher energy level, lower energy level, as they come in and out of favor in the regime. They're kind of tangential and incidental to the focus. And he really makes Hitler the lodestar of the entire operation. Just about everything else, the German people, historical processes around him, the events that impacted Nazi Germany or Hitler made on the world, has kind of been a fog bank in the background. This is really just all Hitler all the time. So it can be a bit claustrophobic. It's like you're the secretary that's in constant contact with him 20 hours a day. You can't get away from him. There he is. Turn around the corner. There he is. Making coffee. Hey, there he is. Going out for a donut. Hey, there he is. There's no break in the action from that sense. You're locked up with a guy in a small room for 2 volumes, 1,000 plus pages. That can be too much for some people. It's very intense and can wear you out as a reader. A lot to process here. And he does a lot about the Nazi state. He's got this theory about working towards the Fuhrer. Like, the more radical a solution you had, the more likely it was to be accepted by the next step up the rung in leadership. If you came up with a great idea that was more radical than anybody else's, crazier than anybody else's, you sold this as a National Socialist way to do it, that was what was going to get accepted and promoted and funded. And he makes it he kind of talks about that as a working model of the entire Third Reich. The crazier the idea, the more radical the solution, the better it was in the eyes of the Nazi leadership. It kind of embodied the idea of National Socialism, to continue the revolution, not to settle down into a normal state of affairs where everybody does normal everyday things and forgets about who's the top dog and why we're here. It had to be all Germany all the time, all Nazis all the time, all Hitler all the time. And as long as you continue with these radical policies of segregation, ostracization, elimination, if you will, aggrandizement of Germany, you're on the right track to be a mover and shaker in the Third Reich. So he works that theme in there along with Hitler all the time. So I find this 5-star the most valuable of the lot. But again, it's a different era of scholarship. It's a different decade. And the viewpoints of Hitler change with the decades. From Bullock's kind of, this guy's an adventurer who accidentally landed in power and didn't expect to, but then ran with the ball as far as he could before he was, brought to heel. And Toland's 70s version of more of a humanistic, approachable guy who eventually got lost in his own self-aggrandizement and believed his own newspaper articles written about him, kind of routine. To Kershaw's diabolical, sinister, knew it all along, had this pre-planned, if you will, maybe not actually physically murdering every Jew he could lay his hands on, but having at least the kernel of the idea from the very get-go. And how he translated that into reality is really the mystery and the tragedy of the 20th century from a European point of view, maybe not necessarily global, but that he was able to actually make this happen. And Kershaw revolves the biography around that notion of how he made it come to pass. So at 3, as I said, Kershaw is the most valuable in the modern sense. But if you want a more distanced view of Hitler and more about the regime itself and the personalities floating around in it, you go back to Bullock. If you want a more humanized, normal guy-ish Hitler, go with Toland. There are several other biographies out there. It continues to be its own mini industry, but I haven't delved into any others. There's a German journalist, Joachim Fest, who put out one in the 70s or 80s. That was a big deal, 1,000-pager. And there's another 2-volume that just came out recently by Volker Ulrich, I think is his name. Haven't even bothered to check that one out yet. Sometimes too much can be too much. And I think 3 Hitler bios for me is probably enough. And probably 1 for you guys, most of you guys, would be probably enough. So take your pick there. And I hope you find one you like, or one that's approachable on this controversial man. And drop some comments or likes. Maybe think about subscribing. We'll come back at you again another time with another vid. See you later.